Who's ready for some hot takes? Let's talk about some of those books that let me down a little bit in 2022. Hey, what's up, bookworms? We are back with some more of the end of the year content. This, of course, is going to be my hate-filled video. Not really. With me, disappointments just means some books that maybe, I wouldn't necessarily call them a bad book. They're just something that maybe just didn't land with me. I was expecting something differently, and it just didn't quite fit what I was wanting or hoping to see. So, they were maybe somewhat of a disappointment to me. I don't really like to use that word, but I can't think of a better word for a video like this because in the end, yeah, I was disappointed. But again, like I said, I'm definitely not one to detract from any of these authors' abilities, or if you love the book, obviously I'm not taking that away from you. But I like to get that out there first, is it's books that really just missed the mark for me. Now first, I do not count rereads on a list like this, so no worries. You don't have to listen to me rant about Night Angel anymore. So Brent Weeks can watch this video and be safe. He can mark himself as safe on social media, that I am not attacking him about the Night Angel trilogy anymore. And again, these are not ranked. These are just 10 books that I have that, actually I think it's 11. 11 books that I have that really just kind of disappointed me this year, but it was a pretty strong reading year. So some of these, were kind of like fringe, but I said, what, I'm going to go ahead and count them on this list. So here we go, guys. I'm going to begin with one I did rather recently, and I talked about in a weekly update. This, of course, is Kings of Ash by Richard Nell. This one just kind of missed the mark for me because book one, I think, and I did take a big break between the two of them. So I've told people, don't, take this to heart as me saying you should or should not read it. For me, it kind of let me down because the first book set up these two major players. And you thought at the beginning of book two, you were finally about to see convergence. And instead, he does this timeline game, which is actually really good. It's very well done. I like the way that he did that a lot. But after about 80% through the book, I'm like, these two characters still have not met up in real time. And it really bothered me. It was something that just, again, it wasn't anything I call bad. It's just something that I think that just kind of let me down a little bit because it's just, I wanted these two characters to meet up face to face. My tablet was a little too bright there, so I'm not glowing anymore. That's why. But yeah, I just wanted convergence between these two characters. And then when you finally do get that moment, what he decided to do just kind of really just upset me enough to where I feel like if I had read book three, like immediately I'd have went into it crossing my arms and just wasn't really excited about it. So I decided I was just going to kind of delay it until next year. And I'm not going to take a 2-year break like I did between book one and two. That was completely unintentional. But yeah, the book did disappoint me enough. Not enough to quit the series, but enough that I'm not ready to read book three immediately after. So it's kind of sad because I know that most of book two thinks that book two is better than book one. I think book one completely blew this one away. So that's why it makes this list. Next up, The Wolf's Hour by Robert McCammon. Now, this one I think was a victim of when and where I read it. I saved this one for Halloween, but I think I read this after Boy's Life and Swan Song, maybe Robert McCammon's two best books, just going by overall consensus, I think, as those two books are considered to be, all-time classics. And so whatever I read next was going to kind of be a step down. What I didn't like about Wolf's Hour was the flashback stuff, the coming of age stuff, the whole origin story for how this character got these abilities. I like that stuff a lot. I wish the whole book was that. But when it went into the real time, present day, World War II spy drama, that stuff I didn't like very much. Thought the romance was pretty bad. It was really, really forced and it didn't really land for me. I just never really found myself invested in that adventure at all. The whole time I just wanted to get back, to the pack and seeing how all that origin stuff happened and his coming of age. That's what I was more interested in, was that story. And it just spent a little too much time in the present day story, which it never framed it as anything but that. I was having more fun in the flashback than I was the present day story, and that really kind of drug it down. But again, I think that was a victim of it coming after I read Swan Song, which completely knocked my socks off. So yeah, that one was just kind of a miss for me, but I am still going to be reading more McCammon because I think he's really, really good at what he does, and I'm anxious to start some more stuff by him in 2023. This one's probably going to be the hottest take on here because I know that BookTube adores it. It's one that people have recommended to me a lot, and I wouldn't call it a bad book. It's just I think the hype train really, really set it too high for me. And I usually don't let that happen. But with Between Two Fires by Christopher Buehlman, I let that happen. I was expecting something just absolutely incredible. And I thought it was just okay. It was just okay. Now, it did get kind of really batshit towards the end. I think reading this after Hellmouth was kind of by Giles Christian. That was kind of a mistake because I thought Hellmouth was a little more of what I wanted this to be. Now, this being like what I would call a medieval horror and set during the time of the plague, which was pretty horrific on its own right. It didn't anything really supernatural to it. But this really dives into some religious themes and stuff that I thought was really well done. I liked the relationship between the main character and this little girl. It was really, really well done. However, just it took a long time to get anywhere, and then I felt like at the end he kind of just tried to throw a ton of stuff at you all at once, and I felt like that could have been fleshed out a little better. So I felt like it was slow in the places where I needed a little more, and then it was too fast in the parts where I wanted him just to slow down and take his time and tell me what was happening. So I think it was really just like a pacing issue. Now I know this was an independent release, and I'm sure he's a more refined author at this point in his career, because I still do have Black Tongue Thief, and I'd like to get into that. But Between Two Fires, I think maybe I had just set my expectations a little too high, and it just didn't scratch that spooky season itch that I was hoping it would do, quite like like Hellmouth did by Giles Christian. So again, I know that these are two very different books, and it's kind of wrong to compare them, but that's just I think that kind of affected why it didn't really hit for me. Now, with Joe Abercrombie, I think the guy can do no wrong. I think he's one of my favorite modern authors working today. But all I had read was First Law. He does have another series, and I decided I was going to go ahead and pick that up. Now, I like the first book in the half a series. What's it called? It's actually called something else. Half a series is kind of what I've kind of jokingly called it, because I felt like it was half great and half not so great. But I liked the first book, but book number 2 was called Half the World, and I didn't like it that much. In fact, it had like a revelation about halfway through the book that completely took me out of it, and I just wasn't really. It's kind of like the same reasons that some of the stuff I struggle with Broken Empire by Mark Lawrence. Not because the characters were psychopaths like that, but just kind of the setting that it tried to use. It was like a twist that I didn't need in a Joe Abercrombie story. I just wanted him to tell me, a Viking story. I was really enjoying that, and I got that a lot. And see, the thing was, in book 1, he sets up this young protagonist that's really awesome, and you're really, really rooting for that character. And in book 2, he's sidelined for new characters. And I didn't even read book 3 because I was so upset with this book. But everybody tells me that book 3 does the same thing. He introduces new characters. And if that's what he wanted to do, that's great. That's his choice. It's just he shouldn't have wrote the character in book number 1 as awesome as he did, because it really made the shoes hard to fill for me to be taking out and given for lack of a better phrase, a YA love story in book 2 that I really didn't care for. So it just kind of lost me along the way. So much so that I can't even remember what the series is called now. Shatter Sea. It's called the Shatter Sea Trilogy. But we've kind of jokingly on the Discord been calling it the half a series. Because, it was only about half really, really good. So it breaks my heart to have Joe Abercrombie on a list like this. But, I like Joe writing his cruel and punishing, disgusting, grimdark world. Him kind of trying his hand at young adult wasn't exactly the guy that I would think would do that. Now, he probably writes YA better than most people, but he did fall into a lot of the same traps of things that drive me away from YA constantly. So just didn't work out. One that I wanted to love this series, guys. I wanted to love it so hard because I know a ton of you, if you're still here, you might have left after you heard my thoughts on it. They were really excited for me to try this series, Cradle by Will White. And so much so that viewers sent me the entire series. And I was very, very grateful that they did that. And they were confident that I was going to like it. And I read the first book, and I was like, I can see what kind of people like it, but everybody tells me, this isn't the best start. Something called progression fantasy. I guess that's just not something that I'm into, because when I read Soulsmith by Will White, I was like, this is not the series. I can't believe you guys thought that I would like this. It really, to me, and it might change over the course of a 12-book series. I think it's 12 books or 11 books, something like that. Can't even find my words because I was so frustrated by this. It seemed like all the book was interested in was, say you were playing Final Fantasy and you're like, oh, I only need 130 experience points to get to level 10. Let me do that over going and fighting the next boss. That's great if you're playing Final Fantasy. That's not great if you're reading a book. Like, for example, in book number 2, there's a character that's in prison, and his friends come to rescue him. He's like, get me out of here. I'm like, no, you should stay in there and fight this monster so you advance to the next level. That's not the kind of fantasy that I read, guys. And it seemed like that's how all the series was, is it was just trying to get the next power up. That's not anything that I'm interested in reading. I'm about character, I'm about world, I'm about story and plot. And it didn't have very much on any of those. So there were some interesting ideas, and I think it's great if people love this series. I think it's really awesome. It's just, clearly it wasn't my type of story. And I know everybody says, oh, well, book 3, it gets different. But then a lot of people said, but if you didn't like this, or this in the first 2 books, you're not going to like it. And I say, well, I didn't like any of those things. And then some more. So that one was just a miss for me. Obviously, no hate. Like I said, it's just a series that I just, no, it's not really for me. People are like, oh, well, you haven't read a lot of manga, and I'm like, oh, I have. I just don't remember. I don't remember Guts and Berserk ever worrying about getting to the next level instead of just going in and cutting fools down. But they say, oh, there's different kind. They use some terminology that I don't understand. Shorin, Shunin, blah blah blah. I don't know what these terms mean. But I guess something like Naruto or Dragon Ball. No, I haven't watched any or read any of that stuff. So maybe that isn't exactly what I was looking for with that one. So that was a big miss for me. One of my bigger disappointments of the year was The Legends of the First Empire by Michael J. Sullivan. So much so that I went ahead and called it after book 4. I didn't think I was going to finish it. Now, I got 2 on here. Age of Swords and Age of Legend. That's books number 2 and 4 in The Legends of the First Empire. So I think it's like the odd numbers were pretty good. The even numbers, my problem really with the series overall, he did a lot of things I don't like about like the Star Wars Disney sequels. Unearned stuff by a lot of your main characters. He does this stuff in here where these characters are they're just the best at everything. It's a lot of Mary Sue, Gary Stu, all that kind of stuff where they're the best at everything, no explanation given. Like, for example, there's a character who's able to decipher a dead language in about 20 seconds of viewing some stuff on a wall and creates a codex. Something that an actual real-life linguist couldn't do in years, this person's doing in 20 seconds. And it continues. This character continues to just like create stuff out of nowhere. Basically, they're advancing this civilization ahead about 500 years in a matter of chapters. And it was something I could never take seriously. It just completely took me out of it. And I appreciate what he was trying to do. I just wasn't really vibing with any of the main characters. I felt like he had about 8 characters that were exactly the same. You could have parsed that down to about half that and kept the same storyline, and nothing would have changed. So really overabundance of characters, world-breaking stuff where he just was taking me out of it by how fast some of these characters were learning to do stuff. And I kind of lost interest and said, maybe I'm just a Royce and Hadrian guy when it comes to Michael J. Sullivan, because this didn't feel like the same world to me at all, because nothing with Royce and Hadrian came easy. They earned everything that they did, and they got into trouble, they got in shit, and they got out of it, and that's what made you root for them. Whereas this is just like, oh, well, they're perfect. They figure everything out because, yay, they're awesome. And I just wasn't what I really got into Michael J. Sullivan for. And so it's a series that just missed for me, but I am interested in going back to the Rhaenyra Chronicles, which is the prequel series of Royce and Hadrian, because I think maybe that will be a little more what I'm looking for. Whereas Legends was just kind of a miss for me overall. This one hurts, guys, because I've talked about how much I love Blake Crouch, and I've been going backwards in his bibliography, and I've liked everything I got to. And this book isn't necessarily what I call bad. It was just up to this point, it was the first one that I wasn't just like blown away by. I love Recursion, I love Dark Matter, I love Wayward Pines, but when I got to Abandon, something just didn't land with this one. When it was doing the back and forth between present day and and the flashback, I always ended up liking one more than the other. It was one of those kind of things that I said, almost about like what I said about The Fisherman by John Langan, is I wish that he would pick one. Do you want to do the period piece, or do you want to do the present day stuff? I'm okay with you going back and forth, but you spend too long in the flashback stuff, and it takes you out of the stuff that's happening in real time. And at least with this one, it's a little better because he does go back and forth almost in like a Lost kind of way. It worked a little better than I did with The Fisherman, where he just stayed in the flashback for 65% of the book. And I was like, yeah, I don't even care about what's happening in real time anymore. But this is not more like that. But it's just like, I always kind of found the present storyline much more interesting than the past storyline. And it does have a pretty good convergence. Nothing I'd call a bad book in any regard. It's just for Blake Crouch, I think I'd come to expect a little more. It didn't quite have near the thrills that I usually come to know and love and expect in a Blake Crouch book. So that one just kind of disappointed me in that regard, just because, like I said, he hadn't had one that wasn't a grand slam for me yet. And that was the first kind of one that was just kind of like, on. But again, I think maybe the worst Blake Crouch book is probably better than a lot of authors' best book. So again, not one that I would call bad, but yeah, it did let me down just a little bit. Well, probably the biggest letdown of the year for me was when I started read along, and I'm one of the first people to drop out of it, I feel just awful about it. Especially because one of my favorite patrons, Steph, actually bought me the whole series. But apparently even she kind of felt similarly. I'm talking about the Codex Alera series by Jim Butcher. Now, I only got to Academ's Fury, so that's the one that I'm going to list here because I didn't think book 1 was that bad. And I don't think that book 2 necessarily was that bad. I just felt like this feels like fantasy I've read a billion times before. And I lost interest so fast. I wasn't really interested in one of the main characters, and she really dominated the book, and I wasn't feeling it. But because it was a read-along, I said, look, I'm not DNFing the series, but I'm going to show it for a while, because I was like, the way we had it structured, I said, these are thick books, and I'm not reading, 4.5 more of these in 2 months. And so that's kind of why I walked away from it. But again, I'm not comparing it to Dresden Files because I don't want to do that. But I feel like one of Jim's strengths is how he writes comedy at the right time. He writes good, funny stuff at the right moments. When everything is getting like a little too big, he will take a breath and give you something to put a smile on your face, make you remember why you love those characters. And I felt like that was kind of missing. It was so self-serious, which again, he's allowed to do different things. But I felt like he was kind of the one thing that made him a really, really great author. He kind of took away in this series. And I wasn't interested in it. And so I just said, I'm just going to go ahead and call it now. There's so much other stuff I want to read. I'm not going to just kind of struggle through a series I'm not really digging. And I feel like I made the right choice because a lot of people that finished that have all been kind of like, it was fine. It's nothing that I'd probably read again, or if I had it all over to do again, I don't know if I would have finished it. But it wasn't bad. That's kind of where I'm at. It's just like it wasn't bad. It wasn't doing anything new or different that I hadn't read a million times. And I got so much other stuff I want to read that I felt like, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and call it. So, yeah, Codex Alera was one of my biggest letdowns this year because, like I said, I did schedule a read-along, and then I was the first one to bounce out, I think, when I started it, and I hate doing that. And that's one of the reasons I decided, you know what, I think I'm going to kind of ease off on the read-alongs. Now, Red Rising, I'm not worried about because I already know I love that one. But outside of that, I feel like I'm just going to kind of be like, look, I'm reading this. If you guys want to join me, that'd be great. If not, no worries. Next up, probably my biggest disappointment of the year because you guys know I love Stephen King. Fairy Tale was kind of a letdown. It was kind of a letdown. I was expecting a lot out of that book. And you know what? For the first 40%, it was exceeding those expectations. It was really, really good. And I think it's just because I love Stephen King's work with character, obviously. And I think that he can do this relationship between someone from an older generation and someone that's like a preteen age. He can do this relationship with these different, they're coming from different worlds, basically, especially when you're talking about a world with modern technology. And you think about what someone who's like 80 has seen the world change in their lifetime. It's amazing, right? But he still is able to write how these two characters would interact and eventually get along over time. So he's doing that. And he has this animal companion. He's doing everything just brilliantly. His slice of life stuff is second to none. No one does it better. And he continues to show even at his later age, he still can do that better than anyone. Then when the actual Portal fantasy stuff starts, kind of got boring. I was liking it somewhat. Then he splits up the two main characters of the story. And then it's just like, I don't know what I'm here for anymore. And he spends a little too long doing like this gladiator thing. And that's usually a trope I love, guys. I love the gladiator storyline. Just didn't find myself interested in anyone else that was in that gladiator storyline. So, when these people were having to fight and kill each other, didn't really care. All I cared about was the main character. And a lot of things where he kind of felt like you might be getting a little long in the tooth, Stephen, because you are starting to talk about some things where it just sounds like all you're doing is talking about the things you loved as a kid, which I have no problem with. I have no problem with them talking about those influences like Edgar Rice Burroughs, like H.P. Lovecraft, like Ray Bradbury. These are all drops in that book that are really, really good. But it starts to be like, but how does it relate to the story? It's not really related to the story whatsoever. And then taking the two best characters and separating them, and one of those characters just disappears for 200 pages, just kind of let me down. It kind of let me down a lot. Because not because this wasn't a Dark Tower world book, I was hoping for connections to that, but that didn't bother me. In the end, I'm fine with him writing fantasy outside of the Dark Tower universe. That's cool, and it was cool to see him escape the real world and get back to some fantasy for a change. Because I felt like the guy needed it. He needed to escape from the real world for a while. Some things it should have went a little differently. So it's just one of those words like I wouldn't call it bad, but it was the rare, like, 5 minutes after I'm done reading it, I wasn't thinking about it anymore. That doesn't usually happen with King. His books usually stay in my head for a while. So, Billy Summers and now Fairy Tale, 2 books have been like, they're fine. Nothing that I would put on, like, my read again list. I felt like Later is the only thing that's kind of got me positive about him not losing his fastball. So as my favorite author, I should expect, hey, look, I'm ecstatic that he's still pumping out this much content at this late in life. I never expected that to happen. So I'm grateful for that. But I'm not going to pretend that the books are great right now when just because he's my favorite author ever. It's, again, they're entertaining. It's nothing that I say I was miserable reading it, but it did let me down. And that is a shame. Last on the list, guys, I have been enjoying my run through Forgotten Realms, and I have loved the Drizzt story so far. However, I'm going to say that Sojourn, the third book in the Dark Elf trilogy, was kind of a letdown because I felt like the first book really established the society. It was really great. Book 2 was him trying to escape from that. Book 3, you're all excited. He's out of this world now. He's going to get into the above ground and things are going to be crazy. And it was just like Adventure of the Week over and over and over and over and over again in that book. I think probably 10 times. It felt like 10 short stories from like a magazine all crammed into one book. And you could tell he was just trying to get the character to a certain point of where the Crystal Shard was going to start then, because since this was a prequel series, but you could feel it, you could feel it. And it felt like one of those things where, you talk about when you're playing in someone else's sandbox, you get to play with the toys, but you don't know how to end it because at the end, the toys got to be back in a certain place because of the established universe. Definitely felt that in Sojourn. So it kind of let me down for that regard. I love traveling with Drizzt and Guinevere. I think that's just 2 of my favorite characters in fantasy now. I love them. But book number 3 was, by comparison to those first 2, somewhat of a letdown. And now that I've read 2/3 of the Icewind Dale trilogy, I can definitely say that's my least favorite book so far. Now, again, I wouldn't call it bad because I've liked all the Drizzt books so far, but that was the one that kind of disappointed me just based off of where Exile ends. And Sojourn picks up and it starts really good, and it just continues to just be Monster of the Week, just over and over again. And it just kind of lost me. So that was somewhat of a disappointment. But guys, that brings me to the disappointing end of this list. So again, I hope that you understand that I don't think any of these books are bad, and I'm not telling you that you're a bad person if you liked any of them. Definitely not. I hope that you enjoyed all of them. I know that the Fairy Tale take will probably get me some heat in the comments because I know when I did my review and I talked about my things I did not like, I got a lot of heat in the comments about how I was crazy, and I might be. You never know. So I think that's what makes us different, right? Is we can talk about these things, and I think that's how we learn. We talk to each other without getting angry. But, it's the internet. There's no time for that rationale, right? But again, guys, I'd like to hear maybe some books that let you down this year. Why don't you go ahead and drop in the comments. Let me know about some of those books that maybe let you down a little bit. Maybe some books that you think maybe if you revisit them at another time, you might feel a little differently. This is all things I like to discuss. So did you read any of these books this year? Were you let down as well, or did you love them? There are no wrong answers. So drop in the comments below, guys, and I will talk to you there.